If you haven't already, I want you to turn there with me to John chapter 4. When you came in this morning, hopefully you got a bulletin. There should have been notes included with it. On the back of there are discussion questions, which we use later on in our equipping communities that meet right after service to discuss what we talk about here this morning. So you're going to want to have this. At the very least, even if you don't stay around afterwards, you can use these questions to really think through what we're talking about today. But before I start talking, I want you to actually do some talking this morning. I know that's not the usual, but I want you guys to do some talking as we kind of get into the passage this morning. And here's what I want you to do. You're going to grab some people around you, and I know this, some of us, it's uncomfortable. All right, we kind of come in to sit in our own seats away from people without having to interact. We want to just come in and sit and listen. Today, I'm not going to let you do that, okay? So I'm sorry, I'm just going to make you uncomfortable. So you're going to grab some people around you, and you're going to talk about this. I want you to imagine this morning that you have been given the task of explaining the color blue to a colorblind person. You have been given the task of explaining the color blue to a colorblind person. And you're going to talk with the people around you because you got to figure out how you're going to do that. Okay? It doesn't have to be, look, you grab one other person, two other people, four other people. You don't want too many, but just grab some people around you. I'm not going to give you long to talk about it. But that's the subject. Talk amongst yourselves. All right? Go ahead, talk. All right, you ready? So hopefully you've come up with some ideas, some solutions here. Color to a colorblind person, the color blue specifically, not just color, but the color blue to a colorblind person. How many feel like you've got some good ideas and you could effectively explain the color blue to a colorblind person? See, I knew there'd be a few of you. I knew there would be a few of you, and I'm excited to see that. But the majority of us have no idea. I mean, just trying to think about this for just a moment, right? I'm wearing the color blue this morning here. I can't even unbutton my shirt this morning, right? The color blue. You see it. You don't even have to think about it. If you have the ability to discern colors, you're not colorblind. You look at the color, you see it. You don't have to think about it. You can even look at the logo for this particular series this morning. You see all those colors mixed together, and it doesn't take any thinking to differentiate between those two things. You just do it naturally. It's an experience that you have without having to work at it. But then when you have to stop and think, okay, I've got this experience. I know what the color blue is. I look at it. I see it. I understand it. And now I have to explain it to someone who's never had the experience of seeing the color blue. And most of us think about that. We look at that. We talk about that. And our response is, that's impossible. It's not impossible. But for most of us, that's how we feel. I believe that for most of us, that's how we feel when it comes to telling other people about Jesus. Here we are. If you are a follower of Christ, you've surrendered your life, right? You've repented and believed. You surrendered your life to the King and Savior, Jesus. You're following after Him. Then you've had an experience in your life. You know who He is. You've experienced His grace, what we just sang about a few moments ago, His grace and forgiveness, the fact that He's stronger and He's able to rescue us. You have experienced a relationship with Him. As you walk with Him, as you read His Word, and as you pray, and though you may go through seasons where it's difficult, at the same time, you've had an experience and you know what it is to have been given that grace and forgiveness in your life. But then when it comes to explaining it to someone else who's never experienced that before, I believe the majority of Christians, followers, go, I don't know how to do that. The problem with that is that it's critical that you and I be able to share Jesus with the people around us. It's absolutely critical. See, if you can't explain the color blue to a colorblind person, they'll live. It's not as if their life depends on you sharing with them and helping them understand what blue really is. Right, if you have to try to explain light to a person who has been blind their entire lives, it's not as if your inability to share light with that person will somehow damage their future. They'll still live. Trying to explain taste to someone without the ability to taste. Explain the taste of cake to someone who has never had the ability to taste before. The smell of a rose. The sound of music to a person who has been deaf their entire life. All of those people, though it might be sad, discouraging, frustrating, overwhelming to think about trying to explain those things to them. At the end of the day, if you're incapable of doing it, those people will still live. But if you and I, as followers of Christ, are incapable of sharing our faith with the people around us, it's not just disappointing, it's not just frustrating. Lives hang in the balance. And not just lives today, we're talking about eternities. Hang in the balance that if we aren't able to share Christ with the people around us, if we don't share Christ and we're incapable of doing it, there are people who are going to die, who you know, who face an eternity separated from God. Paul says it in Romans chapter 10. He says, "How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone telling them?" See, there's people around you, all around you, constantly who don't know who Jesus is. How are they ever going to get to the place of believing if they've never heard? And how are they ever going to hear if you don't tell them? If we don't tell them, if I don't tell the people in my life. See, if we don't say anything, people don't have the ability to hear it. And if they don't have the ability to hear it, then they don't have the ability to believe it. And if they don't have the ability to believe it, we read it just a few moments ago when we started this service in Ephesians chapter 2. They face an eternity separated from God. They face God's judgment. Paul said in Ephesians 2, we were at one time, right, dead in our transgressions and sins. Ultimately, we were children of God's wrath. We were deserving God's judgment and wrath. That's where we all once were. But God, because of His rich in mercy, because of the great love with which He loved us, has saved and rescued us. Though we were sinners, while we were dead in our transgressions and sins, He's raised us up with Christ, seated us with Him in the heavenly places. By grace, you have been saved through faith, and this is not of yourselves, not by works, so that no one can boast. This is what you've experienced, and if you don't share it, then the people around you are still in it. They don't have the "but God" statement in their lives. And so it's absolutely critical that we are able to answer the question, how do we share the color blue with a colorblind person? How do we share Christ with a person who's never met Him before, who doesn't know Him, who has not experienced grace and forgiveness? How do we do that? And that's what we're going to be talking over the next month. Over these next few weeks in our series, it's called Share Life. How do we share life with the people around us? And this is right in line with one of our core values, go to grow. Last week, if you weren't here, you came in this morning, you saw this brick wall up here. I've had people asking me, what is this brick wall really all about? Well, last week, we really kicked off the year with a vision for 2016. We've crossed from one year into the next. And we talked about at the very end of the message that God has a future in store for us that is better than we can even dream about, better than we can imagine. There are things that He wants to use you and me and us together for in this coming year. He wants to use us as a community. And what we challenged ourselves to last week was just this very simple question. God has a future. Are you willing to commit to it? And that future is always twofold. It's, number one, God is always calling us as Christians into community together. Number two, He's always calling us on mission to the world. He's calling us in community, on mission together. And so what I asked people to think about, as people came in last week, there's still bricks in the back. As people came in last week, they were given a brick, and I said that brick represents a choice. And the choice is, are you willing to commit to the future that God has for you or not? And specifically, here's where we apply that to. Are you willing to commit to being a part of this community on mission to Plainfield, the surrounding areas, and to the world? Are you willing to commit? If you're not willing to commit, then this wall doesn't apply. If you are willing to commit, then here's what Jesus says. Jesus says, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not stand against it. And so what I said was, if you're really willing to commit, then we're going to build this wall together. It's a symbolic representation of Jesus building us together as living stones. Peter talks about it, 1 Peter chapter 2, as He's building us as the church. It's symbolic of His call in our lives and our commitment to following after it. And so my encouragement to you, if you weren't here last week, we want to keep building this wall. Eventually, you won't even have to look at me. Please, build it faster. We're going to keep building this wall because God is going to continue to keep building this church. us as a community. And if you say, yes, I'm in, I want to be a part of this church on mission to Plainfield, the surrounding communities, and the world, then there's bricks in the back. Anytime during the service later on, you can come up. There's permanent markers up here. Write your name on it. Add it to the wall. And if you're asking, well, what does it mean to really commit to being a part of this community? Well, there's a whole lot of things we could say, but I'll just give you one. If you say, yes, I'm committing to being a part of Grace Point Plainfield because I believe this is where God's called me, then here's what it means. It means you and I together are going to seek to live out our core values more and more intentionally in 2016. All right, we've got 4 core values. Remember what they are? Go to grow. The word is love shapes character and pray at all times. All right, let's try it again because that was really weak. All right, so go, the word, love, pray at all times, right? Those are our core values. Those are the things that we believe are meant to define us as a community. And what we're going to focus on this month over the next 4 weeks is go to grow in particular. But what I want you to think about over these next number of weeks is we're going to think about each one of those core values. This morning, we're going to focus in on go to grow. And here's what I want to challenge you to. If you say, yes, I'm all in, then what that means this year is you really are going to seek to grow, to be more intentional about the go to grow. And what go to grow means is that, look, growth doesn't happen just by sitting in a room like this. This is nice and it's important, don't get me wrong. But growth doesn't happen just by getting more information. Growth happens as we take and apply God's word as we go on mission to the world, to share the good news. It's as we take and apply God's word as we go to the world with the good news of Jesus Christ. And so there's a few questions. The very last question on the back of your notes, the last discussion question, is really a self-examination question. And there's a few things that I want to challenge you to do. Number one, how did you grow in living out God's word, being on mission where you live, work, and play? So how did you grow in 2015 as you look back? How were you intentional about that? Right, where did you fail? Where did God provide opportunities that you didn't step into? For whatever reason. Right, as we said last week, and by the way, I re-recorded last week's message. It wasn't posted this week because we had some technical difficulties. I re-recorded it. We'll post it this week. I'll send it out to you so that if you weren't here, you can listen to it. I really want to encourage you to do that. I think it's foundational for the coming year. But if we're going to move forward, we've got to deal with the past, and specifically, we really need to be able to deal with our failures. So where did you blow it when it came to go to grow? Where did God provide opportunities that you didn't step into? And will you commit to reaching out and sharing your faith with at least one person this coming year? Right? It's about multiplication. God hasn't given you his love so that you can just hold on to it. He's given it to you so that you can share it. Sharing is about multiplying. And here's the good news. If you share it with one person, you've multiplied. Gone from 1 to 2. So will you commit to being intentional? And again, that is really what we're talking about. When we say we're all in, this is a part of it. This is what it looks like. Is we're not just going to show up and we're not going to just listen to a message and sing some songs on a Sunday morning. And we're going to actually engage in being Grace Point Plainfield on mission together. And if we're going to do that, if we're going to go to grow, then we've really got to be able to answer the question, so how do we share life with the people around us? And the answer I'm going to give you, and we're going to walk through it as we look at Jesus doing it for us, really giving us his own example for us to follow. The answer is there in your notes, and I'm just going to read it to you, and then we're going to walk through it, okay? So if you want to share life, then as you go, you need to meet people where they are, as they are, building relationships, by the way, driving to the need, sharing hope, because of genuine care. All right, read it again. Just read it with me again, okay? If you want to share life as you go, you need to meet people where they are, as they are, building relationships, driving to the need, sharing hope because of genuine care. This is what has to happen if we're really going to share life. And it's how we can actually do it. All right, so number one, it's as you go. Here's Jesus. If you look at John chapter 4, Jesus is on a journey. He's traveling, it says in verse 3, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee, and he had to pass through Samaria. And so he's on a journey. He's heading from point A to point B, and as he's passing through on the way to Galilee, on the way to point B, he comes into a city, and that's where he meets this woman. It's on his journey as he's going. In other words, he doesn't wait until he gets to Galilee. He doesn't say, listen, I'm busy right now because I'm heading in this particular direction. I've got to get from here to there. And by the way, he very easily could have said to this woman, hey, I know that you probably need to talk. I know you've got some things going on in your life. But if you read through the passage, it says he's exhausted. He's tired. There's been a lot that's going on. And he's on a journey. He's on a mission. Sometimes we get so caught up in where we're going that we miss the opportunities that are right there in the process. It's as Jesus is going, that's where he shares life. And that is actually our call as well. Matthew chapter 28, when we're given our great commission, the mission that Jesus has us here for. In John 20, verse 21, he says, just as the Father sent me, so now I am sending you. And what he tells him in Matthew 28 is that sending is, he says, go therefore into all the world and make disciples of all nations. Now the problem that some of us have with that mission that Jesus has given to us is that we interpret the idea of going as if it's going is only when we go on a mission trip. Or we go on the mission field, or we go somewhere to serve, all right? So going in some people's minds is only when you go to Africa or Asia, or you go somewhere else where you can share Jesus with people on mission. That's not what Jesus is talking about. At least that's not all that he's talking about. He's talking about much more than that. When he says go, what he really is saying, he's saying as you go. Here you are, you're right here, and you're going to be going from this place to somewhere else. As you go, wherever you go, whatever you're doing, as you go, make disciples. In other words, the mission field isn't just over there where you're going to get to at point B. The mission field is everywhere in between, right where you are, all the way to point B, and everywhere beyond that too. The mission field is wherever you are, as you're going about your life. Here's the good news about that. Number one, the good news about that is you don't have to add anything to your already busy schedule. I think a lot of people really feel overwhelmed, and so when we talk about things like sharing your faith with other people, we go, man, I know that I need to be doing that, and I really want to do that, but the truth is, Dan, I'm just super busy, and I've got so much going on in my life, and I can't add anything to my life. I can't add anything else. Good news, you don't have to. This isn't a program. The place where you're called, your mission field, is wherever you are. See, here you are. You're going to leave here this morning. At some point in time, you'll leave this building, and you will go somewhere else. Jesus says, as you're going, that's where you're called to go. You might go to the grocery store, you might go to the gym, or you might go to your house, or you might go to your neighborhood, or you might go see some friends, or wherever it is, as you're going. You might go and get some gas at the gas station. Wherever you're going, as you're interacting with people, that is the place where you are to share life. And so the good news is you don't have to add anything to your schedule. The bad news is you can't make any excuses. You can't say, well, I would love to go and do that, but I can't afford going on a mission trip. I would love to do that, but I've got so much work going on. I'm constantly at my job. Oh, good news. Guess what? If you're at your job all the time, there's people all around you who need to hear about Jesus. Wherever you are, it's as you go. If you're going to share life, then you've got to get a vision for what Jesus sees as the opportunities all around you, and it's wherever you are, whenever you are. I was reading on Facebook this morning. Might have been in the middle of the night last night, actually. I don't remember. I was reading at some point in time in the last 24 hours on Facebook. And someone was talking about the fact that they're at the grocery store and somebody comes up and is kind of talking to them about everything that's in their grocery cart. And they were annoyed that somebody was coming up and talking to them about everything that's in their grocery cart. And they're going, boy, I just wish people would leave me alone. See, for us as Christians, if we're really on mission, we should be thankful when people come up out of the blue to talk to us. Because here's what that is. It's an opportunity. So number one, you want to share life, then as you go. Number two, you need to meet people where you are. Not where you are, You need to meet people where they are, right? Jesus is on a journey. What's really important about Jesus' life is he doesn't stay where he's at and wait for people to come to him. He goes to where people are. In particular, in this case, he's going to a place that most Jews didn't want to go to, which was to Samaria. Most people would actually kind of go the long way around because all the Jews hated the Samaritans at this point in time. There's a lot of animosity between them. But Jesus doesn't stay away. Jesus doesn't stay where he's at. He doesn't stay in Nazareth. He doesn't stay stagnant in one place. He moves around from place to place, going and meeting people right where they are. If we want to share life, you need to listen very carefully to this. If we're going to share life, we can't wait for people to come here. We can't wait for people to walk through the doors of this building. We can't wait for people to walk through the doors of the building and hope that whoever's preaching this particular morning will share the gospel, and that's how people will get saved, and you don't have any responsibility in that. If we're going to share life, then we have to go and meet people where they are. And that's the wonderful thing of Jesus telling us that as you go make disciples, he's saying, listen, you're going to be on your journey. And so as you go on your journey, go and meet people wherever they are, wherever you are. Because as you're going about your ordinary, everyday life, people are out there, people are interacting with you, and those are the places out there where people are in desperate need for you to share life with them. Don't get me wrong. When people come here, they get the opportunity to hear the gospel. But listen, the primary place that people should be hearing the gospel and coming and putting their faith in Jesus Christ, their Savior, should not be in this room. It should not be in this building. It should be out there because we're meeting people right where they are. Wherever they are, as we go. So we need to meet people where they are, but we also, number 3, we need to meet them as they are. Here's Jesus, and he's in a place that most Jews wouldn't go to because they hated the Samaritans. But what he does here in this moment when he meets with this Samaritan woman is absolutely radical. It's controversial. Most people, in fact, I believe the disciples looked at this, what was going on between Jesus and this woman, and went, that's completely unacceptable. You don't do that. But stop and just think about this for a moment. Jesus, the sinless Son of God, who's taken on flesh and blood, here he is, he's in Samaria, the place where most Jews wouldn't go because they hated the Samaritans, and he's interacting with a woman, and it's not just any woman, right? The reason that this is so radical is, first of all, yes, because she's a Samaritan. Jews hated the Samaritans. Second of all, it's because she's a woman. Most men, there were a lot of men who wouldn't even talk to their own wives in public, let alone strangers. She's a Samaritan. She's also a woman. And at this point in time in history, women were treated at most as second-class citizens. Men don't interact with women in public at this point in time, particularly strange women from Samaria. And not only is she a strange woman from Samaria, she's got some real problems. And we find out later why she has problems, right? She's been married 5 times, and now she's living in immoral relationship, living with a man who's not even her husband. But we know that there's a problem because of when she's at the well and who she's at the well with. It tells us that she comes alone in the middle of the day. It's 12 o'clock, it's noon, and she's alone. And it's not odd that she's coming to get water. What's odd is that she comes alone and it's 12. It's the middle of the day. Most women would come every day to get water, but they would either come in the morning when it was still cool or evening after the sun was going down when it was cool. And they would always come in groups because there's safety in numbers. But here's this woman. She's coming alone and in the middle of the day. Why? Because she is a social outcast. I mean, it's not just that this is a woman that Jews don't want anything to do with her because she's a Samaritan woman. Her own fellow countrymen, the other Samaritans, don't want anything to do with her. And Jesus, the sinless Son of God, meets and interacts with her, meets her where she is and meets her as she is. He doesn't say, hey, listen, you got to clean up your act before you can come and talk to me. In fact, stop and think about this for a moment. Here she is, and it's not as if she's come out to the well to pray. It's not as if she's come out to the well to repent of her sins and say, God, I'm so sorry, and I don't want to live this way anymore. Jesus meets her right in the middle of her sin. I mean, she tries to cover it up later on when he actually confronts her and says, bring your husband. She says, I don't have a husband. She's trying to hide the reality of what's going on in her life because she is living in it, and yet Jesus comes and meets her right where she is. You want to share life, you need to meet people where they are as they are. We cannot place expectations on people. To say, before you can really meet Jesus, you've got to get your life cleaned up. You've got to stop doing that thing, whatever it is. You got to start showing up to church every week if you really want to meet Jesus. You got to start dressing differently. You got to stop swearing. You got to clean yourself up if you want to get to Jesus. We need to remember that's not the gospel. The gospel is not clean up in order to get to Jesus. It's let's meet Jesus and he'll clean up what needs to get cleaned up. You want to share life, then as you go, you need to meet people where they are, and you need to meet people as they are. Because that's how Jesus meets them. Jesus doesn't say, I'm unwilling to interact with you until you've left that guy that you're living with. Jesus doesn't say, hey, I'm only willing to talk with you if you feel bad enough today. That's amazing grace. Meeting her right where she is. But then you also need to build relationships. Number 3, you need to meet. So you need to, as you go, you need to meet people where they are, as they are, and you need to build relationships. In other words, people are not targets. People are people. And if you're really going to be able to share life with them, you have to actually get to know them. You have to develop a relationship. And here's what that means. A relationship is an experience in which someone gets to be a part of your life and you get to be a part of their life. In other words, if you're going to share life, you have to invite other people in, and you not only have to invite them into your life, you have to actually get into their life, and you need to get to know them. And I love what Jesus does here, because in my mind, what he does is a great example of how we can open doors for relationships in order to share life with people around us. What does he do? Right? Take a look. Verse 7, a woman from Samaria came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, give me a drink. There's not much that this woman has to offer Jesus at this point. There's not much that she can do for him. She's living in a pretty messy place in her own personal life. She's not living for God. She's not interested in living for God. But there is something that Jesus needs that she has. He's been traveling. He's thirsty. He's tired. And she comes with a pitcher of water. And he says, I'd like a drink of water. And again, this is radical, because imagine this woman who, for the most part, first of all, because she's a Samaritan, would never expect a Jew to talk to her or to ask her for anything. In fact, the reason the disciples have gone away is because they've gone to find food. Specifically, they've gone to find kosher food, because Jews at this point in time wouldn't even accept food that had been touched by the hands of a Samaritan. So first of all, a Jew is asking her for a drink of water, but also a man who is a rabbi. There's something unique about this man who is asking her for a drink of water. Imagine how shocked she was when most likely she would have been expecting hostility, rejection, judgment. Instead of that, he says, I'd like a drink of water. Jesus disarms the situation immediately because he invites her into his own story, his own life, by giving the opportunity to serve a need that he had. And because of that, that opened the door for a conversation that never would have been possible outside of it. If you want to actually share life, you've got to get into people's lives, and sometimes the best way that you can get into other people's lives is inviting them into your own. Inviting people over for dinner, asking them to bring something with them. It's simple, but giving them the opportunity, your neighbors, a coworker. I've done projects on my house at times where I'm working and, I'm semi-handy, but I'm not that handy, and so I'll ask people to come over and help me. I've got neighbors all around me that at times I've asked them to come over, hey, would you come over and give me a hand? And it opens a door for conversation and relationship building because you've taken down the walls. Jesus takes down the walls and he begins to interact with her, and he has insight that you and I don't have, insight that the only way you and I can get it is in the context of relationship, because he knows something about this woman. What he knows about her is her kind of the situation with men in her life. He knows, and that's why he asks it. That's why he says, go and get your husband, is because he already knows what's going on in her life. He knows that she's had 5 husbands, and now she's divorced again, and she's living with another guy who's not even her husband at this point in time. And he's not asking it to her. He's not bringing it up so he can rub her face in her sin. He's bringing it up because in knowing this about her, In knowing this about her, he has an opportunity to share hope in a very practical and concrete way. But again, here, and I'm going to get into that, but before I do, just let me say this. If you're going to share hope, you've got to actually get to know the people that you're interacting. You've got to build relationships. You've got to let them into your life, and you've got to get into their lives. It takes time. It takes energy. It takes sacrifice. It's not Facebook. Right? Facebook gives the illusion of relationship because there's no cost. Relationships require cost. They require investment. If you're going to share life, it requires investment. It requires you to actually develop a relationship, because in that context of relationship, you actually can care about them, and in caring about them, you get to know them, and you can see the need. Right? You've got to build relationships, and you've got to drive to the need. When Jesus brings up this whole situation with men in her lives, again, he's not trying to drag her through her sin. He's trying to drive to the need that is so obvious in her life. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 says God has written eternity in our hearts. He's written eternity into every single person's heart. Everybody you interact with has eternity that's been written into their hearts. But here's what we know about everyone who doesn't know Jesus. Because of sin, it's been damaged. And the result is a hole. There is an emptiness because we were designed for God. Augustine says, God, it's a prayer. He says, you have designed us for yourself, and therefore our hearts are restless until we find our rest in you. Every person has been designed to find their rest in God. Eternity has been written in their hearts. And because of the brokenness, because of sin, that what's been written into our hearts has been damaged, and there is a hole, there is an emptiness there that we feel the need. Everyone feels the need to satisfy and fill up. Every person without Jesus Christ is restless because until we find our rest in Him, we are restless because that emptiness is there and we're trying to fill it. Blaise Pascal put it this way. He says, what else does this craving, the longings that we have, and this helplessness proclaim that there was once in man a true happiness, of which all that now remains is the empty print and trace. There's a hole there. This he tries in vain to fill with everything around him, seeking in things that are not there the help he cannot find in those that are. In other words, he's trying to fill what once was with the things that are now here. But none of those things can help, since this infinite abyss can be filled only with an infinite and unchangeable object, in other words, by God Himself. Here's what you can know about every single person that you interact as you go, meeting people where they are as they are. And as you build relationships, here's what you can know. If they don't know Jesus, there is a restlessness in their heart. There is an emptiness that is there. There is a longing that they're trying to fill. And when Jesus brings this up, what He's really addressing is that longing in her life. See, He says, give me a drink of water, and they begin this interaction, and Jesus says, hey, listen, I've got a water that always satisfies. See, if you drink from this well again, you'll get thirsty, kind of like the men that you've been in relationships with. So you go into those relationships hoping that's going to fill you up and satisfy you, but the truth is it never does it? And here's how I know it doesn't, because you've been with 5 men and now you're living with another guy. Why? Because every single one of those relationships has failed you. Just like the water in the well, Jesus says, it will fail you and it will leave you empty. He says, but here's the good news. I know you've got the emptiness. I know that you're trying to fill it up and it's not working, but I've got the water that will truly satisfy you. And Jesus says, it's me. He says, I'm the water. I'm the water that will satisfy you. You're looking for this fulfillment in all of these relationships. You're longing to be accepted and loved. You're longing for that relationship in which you feel complete. You complete me. You make me whole. And yet the truth is, every single one of those relationships has disappointed you and it's left you empty. And that's why you've moved from man to man to man to man. And what I'm telling you is the Son of Man has now come, the one who actually has the ability to satisfy you forever, to fill that gaping hole that is in your heart. Jesus drives to the need. And again, that's what we've got to see. Every person has that need. Though it may be expressed differently, every person has that need, and the only way you will ever find it is if you build relationships with the people around you. If all we do is treat people as a target, and we say, well, I don't want to build relationships, I'm just going to go throw the 4 spiritual laws at every single person I interact with. The problem is though you may be trying to share Jesus with people, most of the time you'll be absolutely failing. Why? Because you're not actually meeting people where they are. You want people to come to you. See, when all we do is throw verses at people, what we're saying is we want you to get to us, but we're not actually willing to come to you and actually build a bridge where we can get to know you, to understand where you are, so that we can practically share hope in your life in addressing the need that you so obviously feel. If we're going to share life, we have to build relationships, and building relationships, you get the opportunity to have insight to see the way that God-sized whole expresses itself in that person's life. And it may be in a whole number of ways. In this instance, it's relationships. In other instances, it may be a person who is just a workaholic. In some people, it's addiction. In some people, it's possessions. It's some people, they are dissatisfied and they're continuing to try to find that satisfaction in whatever that thing is. And when you see it, that's when you get the opportunity to actually share hope. You get the opportunity to share hope. And that's what Jesus does here. He shares it. And that's our responsibility. That's our call. If we're going to do it, we've got to, as we go, meet people where they are, as they are, build relationships, drive to the need, and share the hope, which is what Jesus does in this moment. I'm the water that can actually satisfy you. But let me just say this. All of these tips are wonderful, but I believe there is something else that has to happen. If I give you these tips and we walk away, we may, for a time, try to apply them and live them out, but over an extended period of time, end up going right back to where we've been all along. Back to not sharing, because I believe there's a deeper issue that has to be addressed. If we're really going to share life, we don't just need to have good tips and good ideas in terms of how to build relationships. What we really need to do, listen, we need to care. We need to care. Look at the disciples here in this moment. I just want you to see this. Verse 27, just then his disciples came back. They marveled that he was talking with a woman, but no one asked, "What do you seek, and why are you talking with her?" So the woman left. So the disciples come back. Here's Jesus interacting with this woman in need, sharing life with her. And the disciples come back, and they see Jesus talking to this woman, and they marvel at it. They think about it. They're going, wow, that's kind of strange that he's talking to this woman, and they're processing through it. But no one interacts with her. No one talks to her. Why not? It doesn't tell us, it doesn't say, well, here's exactly what was going on in their heads and their hearts at that time, but I can tell you this. I can at least make this observation, that the reason the disciples at this time don't engage with this woman, it isn't because they're trying to stand back and go, well, Jesus has got this one. In my mind, the reason the disciples don't engage and talk to this woman is because there is something else that is more important to them. Whether it be food, whether it be their own reputation, because we don't want to talk to this woman, there is something else that is driving their lives that they don't care enough to interact with this woman at this point in time because something else is more important to them. Jesus actually addresses it later on when he says, look to the fields. They're ripe for harvest, right? The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. What Jesus is pointing at in this moment is the people are coming back from the city. It's not time for harvest because there's still 4 months left. He says it. There's 4 months until harvest, but when he points to the fields, what he's seeing is all of these people are coming back from the town because the woman goes to the town to tell her friends to come and meet Jesus, and they're coming through, and Jesus says, look at the fields. See the people coming through? The harvest is plentiful. There is need everywhere that you go. The issue isn't a lack of need. The issue isn't a lack of people that need to know about Jesus. The issue isn't the lack of brokenness in our world. Do you know what the issue is? Jesus says, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. In other words, there's plenty of people in need, but there's not enough people who care enough to do something about it. Because something else is more important to us. There is an ad that I saw years ago that sticks in my mind. I can't get it out. The imagery of it was so powerful. I think it was an ad about addiction. But in this ad, the camera, the scene opens up, and you see a person in water, in a lake, and they're drowning. They're struggling to stay afloat, and it looks like they're out in the middle of the water, and there's nobody there to help them. But then the camera begins to pan out, and as it pans out, you see that 2 feet from this person who's drowning, there's a dock. And standing on the dock is another person who's just watching them. And as you see it, it creates a problem inside of you because you're going, how can you stand there and watch that person drown? Because most of us, if we're standing there, what are you going to do? Because you care, you're going to reach down, you're going to do everything you can to grab that person because it is within your power to help that person, to rescue them, and to pull them up onto the dock. Why in the world would you not do that? I believe when we fail to share Christ, that is a perfect picture of the situation of our lives. Because there are people all around us who are drowning in sin. And we have the power and the ability to reach out and to share life with them. And the question is, what's going to get us to move? What's going to get us to reach out? What's going to get us to grab them and pull them onto the dock? And the only answer is that we have to care enough. We have to care enough for the situation that's going on to say, I'm going to do what it takes in my part to reach out with the hope that I have to bring you onto the dock. But the only thing that's going to move us is, again, if we care enough. And it begs the question, do we care enough? Or is there too many other things that have become more important for us? Do we understand the situation? C.S. Lewis, in his message, The Weight of Glory, says it may be possible for each of us to think too much of his own potential glory hereafter. It's hardly possible for him to think too often or too deeply about that of his neighbor. The load or weight or burden of my neighbor's glory should be laid daily on my back, a load so heavy that only humility can carry it. And the backs of the proud will be broken. It's a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses, those who will be glorified one day. To remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption such as if you meet, if at all, only in a nightmare. All day long, we are in some degree helping each other to one of these destinations. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities, it is with awe and circumspection proper to them that we should conduct all our dealings with one another, all friendships, all loves, all play, all politics. There are no ordinary people. You have never met or talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat, but it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit, immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. He says, here's what we need to remember. Every single person we interact with has an eternal destination, and you and I have the ability to reach out and to help them to find the very hope, the grace of God that gives them the same destination that we have. Eternity with God. But we have to be driven to care. And the only way, it's not just, hey, let's go out and try harder. Let's care more in 2016. The only thing that will ever get us there is this, is that you and I remember that we were the Samaritan woman. That was us. We were the ones who were lost. We were the ones who were without hope. We were the ones who deserved judgment and wrath. But instead of that, what happened? Jesus, somewhere along the way, Jesus met you through another person who took the time to invest in you and share that life so that you now know that your eternal destiny is with him. You don't face his judgment. Instead, you know his acceptance and his forgiveness. God loved you while you were still a sinner. In the midst of your mess, he met you and he rescued and saved you. You and I, we were the Samaritan woman, and God came. Jesus met us where we were, as we were. He drove to the needy, shared life, and he rescued us, and he brought us out of the darkness into light. And when you know that, when you remember that, when you see that, that's the very thing that sets you free to care for the broken people around you, no matter who they are, no matter what they've done to you, no matter where they are. You can care for them. Why? Because Jesus genuinely cared for you. Let me just give you this. Number one, some of us here this morning, this message really doesn't apply to you because you've never actually received the hope that we're talking about sharing. If that's you, I want to invite you this morning to come to know Jesus. He came to rescue you. He came to save you. He came to satisfy you. And you may not understand it all yet, but today the invitation is this. Jesus came to do for you what you could not do for yourself. He has living water, and the invitation is to drink it. The invitation is to believe. Believe that it's true. For some of us, that's right where we need to start. And if you're there today and you've got questions, I'd be glad to talk with you more about it. If you have believed, some of us, you know where we need to start? We need to start by praying that we actually do begin to really care for the people around us who don't know Jesus. You know, one of the tests that I think we should all give ourselves when it comes to examining whether or not we really care, just a simple test. When you interact with the people around you, do you ask them questions? Do you have a genuine interest in the lives of the people around you? It may sound really simple, but you know, we live in a generation, we live in an age that continues to develop this narcissistic mentality that says it's really all about me, where we're constantly posting on Facebook about our own stories. And we've failed at the art of genuine interest in the people around us. I mean, I have conversations with people all the time where, honestly, if I stopped asking questions, the conversation would end. People are so ready to tell you about themselves and talk about themselves, but we're not very skilled at learning to ask good questions and be genuinely interested in the lives of people around us. Some of us need to start by simply praying and asking God to give us real, genuine care for the broken and lost people around us. That may be where you need to start this morning. And then there's others of us that, again, when it comes to Go to Grow, here's the challenge that I want to give you. Here in 2016 is that you would multiply. That you would take intentional steps. And good news, I'm not asking you, God isn't asking you to share with everybody that's out there. Here's my challenge to you. Who's one person? Just one. That you can start praying for. And here's what I would challenge you to do. I'm not challenging you to even go and share Jesus with them this week by going and sharing the gospel with them. Share Jesus with them by starting to build a relationship. Take some time to intentionally begin to get to know them this week. Begin to ask them questions. Invite them over for dinner. Whatever it is, this is what we are going to be on mission for as a church. It's what our calling is. As we go, meeting people where they are, as they are, building relationships so that we might drive to the need and share life. So who's the one person? Who's the one person?